Elena needs a car. I am Joseph. This is Input English. For those of you joining us for the first time, this channel was created for the acquisition of English with comprehensible input. I have lots of videos that explain just how comprehensible input works, and now we have a good library of videos that you can review and use for comprehensible input. These videos that I have in the library are stories, some of which are fictional, and some of which are about my past and my family. I also have some discussions about various topics. From time to time, we get to go explore places here in Northern California. So let's get into our story about Elena. Elena is a little over 50 years old. She is Ginger's older sister, but she was 10 years old when Ginger was born. When Ginger was a newborn and a toddler, it was Elena that provided a lot of the child care. She loved taking care of her little baby sister, and she learned that she had a talent for this. She much preferred taking care of someone as compared to studying subjects in school or developing some career in an office. She wanted to take care of people. So when Elena graduated from high school, she chose to not go on to college. She married her high school sweetheart about a year after graduation, and they built a life together. She has one son, Sean, who is now 14 years old. Unfortunately, Elena and her husband gradually developed differences and divorced a number of years ago. So now Elena and her son, Sean, live together in an apartment here in town, not too far from her sister, Ginger. Elena has been working at various jobs over the years, most of which are related to caring for people. She has done work in childcare. She worked in a school as an assistant teacher for several years. She has been a caregiver for several elderly people trying to stay in their own homes in spite of their physical or mental handicaps. She has done some house cleaning for people. A number of years ago, when money was tight, she sold her car to save money. She's been using public transportation, and she has been borrowing cars from her friends and family from time to time in order to get things done. Elena has been saving up her money each week for the past 3 years because she wants to buy a car. At the present time, she has her cash at the ready, and she's ready to make the move and buy a car. But which one? She is concerned that the purchase price is only a small portion of the actual expense of having a car. This comes from her experience in the past. The purchase price is important, but maintenance, insurance, fuel, there are many expenses that go into having a car. In spite of these expenses, she's pretty sick of having to depend on other people for transportation. She would like to have the flexibility of having her own car. She asked her friends about cars, and many of them drove older cars that needed a lot of maintenance. Several of her friends had cars that were described as gas guzzlers. That is, they used a lot of fuel, and the fuel was expensive. So what she decided is she wanted a compact car that got good mileage and had a reputation for not costing a lot for repairs. She didn't want a beater. That is, she didn't want a car that was all beaten up and destroyed and ugly. She wanted to buy a car from somebody who was honest and who took care of that car so that it would be a good value for her. She had a big fear about buying a car on her own because her expertise is taking care of people, not making deals. Her expertise is taking care of the needs of human beings, not analyzing the value of an automobile or detecting hidden flaws. So she figured she needed some help. One day she was talking to one of her coworkers and mentioned the concerns about buying a car from a stranger. The coworker explained that she had a client who was trying to sell a car but had similar concerns about dealing with the public and listing that car to bring people to the house to kick the tires. That is, to casually examine the car and waste his time. So this might work out very well. Elena's coworker asked her client whether she could give Elena his phone number so that they could make contact and she could look at that car that he was going to sell. It was a Honda Civic, about 10 years old, and it might be just what she wants. The fellow selling the car is named Steve, and he agreed and provided his phone number so that Elena could call him. This is where Elena had a problem because she was scared. She found herself too timid to lift the telephone and make an appointment to come out and look at the car. She told Ginger about her conflict, and Ginger suggested that maybe Robert would make the call for her. Maybe Robert could go out with her and look at the car and provide some support. Elena thought that was fabulous. Ginger said, better yet, David is coming home for the weekend and he would be perfect to go out with you because he'll have free time on the weekend. When David arrived home on Friday, Ginger asked him to arrange a time so that they could go look at this car that Steve is selling. David was happy to do this, and he made the call. The appointment was 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. When the time came, David, who was driving his mom's car, drove Elena and Sean to look at this car. So the three of them arrived at the correct time, and there in front of the house was this silver Honda Civic. The owner was standing next to it because he expected them. They all greeted each other, and then they started looking at the car in earnest. Elena tried to conceal her feelings. She didn't want to look too anxious or too enthusiastic about this, but she found it very difficult to conceal her feelings. She liked this little car. They opened all the doors and the trunk, and they looked through it. It was spotless. There was almost no wear, and there was no dirt anywhere. It was a clean car. There was a very small dent in the left front fender, but it was hardly noticeable. Steve, the owner, the seller, explained that there was a small fender bender in a parking lot a few years ago, but that the repairs had been complete and there was no damage to the frame of the car. This little dent came more recently, and no one really knows how it happened. David opened the engine compartment and saw that the engine was very clean and looked like it was in perfect working order. He started the car and listened for odd sounds, and none happened. He noticed that the air conditioner compressor cycled on and off with normal sounds. He could tell that it was probably working just fine. Satisfied, he closed the hood. Now it was time to negotiate. And it was also time for a test drive. Steve gave the fob to Elena and invited her to take the car for a test drive. She was very much looking forward to this. She accepted the fob, and Sean got into the passenger seat. Elena was at the wheel, and she adjusted her seat appropriately. They drove away. This left David and Steve to talk about price. David addressed this topic directly. He said, "So, what are you asking for this car?" Steve said, "Well, I checked Blue Book, and this car usually sells in a private sale like this for between $8,600 and $9,100. That's the range according to Blue Book. That's for a car of this model with this much mileage and no damage." David asked, "Then what are you asking?" Steve replied, $8,000. After a short pause, David said, "Well, we were not really planning on spending that much money. I can offer you $6,600 cash today, now." Steve winced. He said, "Wow, that's a big discount. That's quite a bit lower than asking." It was then that Steve did some quick math in his head. If it was a 10% discount on $8,000, that would drop the price to $7,200. If it was a 15% discount, that would drop the price to $6,800. As he did this math, he stated those numbers aloud. And then he wondered to himself what sort of discount was reasonable to make this deal work. He had an offer, a firm offer of $6,600, which was more than a 15% discount compared to asking price. Steve said, "Well, we've established a couple of things. We know that I'm asking $8,000 and you think that's too high. And we know that you are offering $6,600 and I think that's too low. So what we need to do is find a good number in between those two and make a good deal for your aunt." David smiled broadly because this is exactly what he wanted to do. He answered that suggestion by raising his offer to $6,800, to which Steve immediately suggested that if they could agree on $7,000, the deal was done. Without hesitation, David said, "Done." Now, the reason this was done so decisively is David had already worked through this with his aunt, Elena, and he knew that she was willing to spend up to $8,000. He felt it was his job to save her some money and negotiate a good deal for her and not just offer this fellow the full asking price. The deal was made and a handshake sealed it. It was a moment later that Elena drove back up and parked the car. As she stepped out of the car, she was smiling broadly. He asked her what she thought. She said, "This is a very nice car. It's clean and it drives so well. I like this car." David said, "You just bought it." Her smile got bigger. The rest of the deal was just the paperwork. They went through the title and filled out all the details so that the transfer could be done legally and properly. They counted out $7,000 in crisp $100 bills. They were ready to make this deal, and she had cash at the ready. The money was counted and put aside. Steve gave Elena the title, and she put it in the glove compartment for safekeeping. He gave her the 2 fobs that allow the car to operate with this keyless entry and keyless ignition system. Steve thanked David for helping to make the deal, and he wished Elena good luck with this car, hoping that it will serve her well for many years. With that, the trio of car purchasers jumped into the 2 vehicles and drove away. Steve went back into the house, realizing that he had sold the car for less than he had hoped for, but more than he expected. Steve was very satisfied with how this turned out, particularly that he had transferred this car into the hands of such a nice family. I hope you liked this episode. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.